I stared at the text message on my phone, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the device. The words blurred through my tears, but I had already memorized them. Miss Reed, this is Agent Morrison from the FBI. We need you to come in for questioning regarding money laundering and fraud allegations connected to Thorne Industries. Do not leave the city. My father had finally done it. Marcus Thorne, the man who was supposed to protect me, had just framed his own daughter for crimes I never committed. And as I sat in that dingy motel room in Queens listening to sirens wail in the distance, I realized that this was war. A war I never asked for, but one I was damn sure going to win. But before I tell you how I brought down one of Manhattan's most powerful men, before I show you how an empire built on lies came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that toxic people, even family, don't deserve a place in your life, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of people who fought back and won. And drop a comment telling me what you would do if your own parent betrayed you like this. Your support means everything, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment I should have walked away but didn't. To the day I still believed that love and loyalty meant something to Marcus Thorne. 3 months earlier, I stood outside the glass doors of Thorne Tower, the building that had defined my entire existence. 80 floors of steel and ambition piercing the Manhattan skyline like a monument to everything my father had built, or rather everything he had taken. At 28 years old, I had spent the last 6 years working myself to the bone. In that building, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, proved myself enough, my father would finally see me as more than just a disappointment. I was about to present the biggest project of my career. I had spent 18 months developing a revolutionary renewable energy initiative that could transform Thorne Industries from a ruthless corporate machine into something that actually mattered, something that helped people. I had barely slept, barely eaten, poured every ounce of my energy into making this perfect. Because deep down, I still craved his approval like a drug I couldn't quit. The elevator ride to the 80th floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman in a sharp navy suit, hair pulled back in a severe bun, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. I looked confident. I looked professional. I looked nothing like the terrified little girl inside who just wanted her father to say he was proud of her. The boardroom was already full when I entered. 15 executives in identical, expensive suits, their faces carefully neutral, arranged around a massive table that probably cost more than most people's houses. And at the head of that table sat Marcus Thorne, my father, looking every inch the titan of industry that Forbes magazine loved to write about. Silver hair, perfectly styled custom Italian suit that cost $10,000, and those cold blue eyes that had never once looked at me with warmth. I started my presentation with confidence that I had practiced for weeks. I showed them the numbers, the projections, the environmental impact, the positive press coverage we could generate. I talked about legacy, about building something that mattered beyond profit margins. I was passionate. I was prepared. I was everything I thought he wanted me to be. And then Marcus Thorne did what he did best. He destroyed me. He picked up my carefully prepared portfolio and threw it across the table. The sound of it hitting the polished wood echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. 14 executives suddenly found their shoes absolutely fascinating. No one met my eyes. Idealism doesn't make money, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. It's for weak people who can't handle the real world. And in this building, we don't have room for weakness. What exactly have you learned in all these years working for me? I felt my face burning, but I refused to look away. I had spent my entire life training myself not to cry in front of him. I've learned how to recognize a tyrant when I see one. I said, my voice colder than I knew I was capable of. And I won't work for someone like that anymore. The room went deadly silent. I could feel the shock radiating from every person present. No one spoke to Marcus Thorne like that. No one. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh or even an angry laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had just been presented with an amusing insect to crush. Then leave. Walk out of here with your empty hands, and let's see how long you survive. Without the Thorne name, you're nothing. You're a zero. I should have seen it then. I should have recognized the malice behind those words, the calculation in his eyes. But I was too angry, too hurt, too desperate to maintain what little dignity I had left. I walked to his desk, removed my security card, my corporate credit card, and the keys to the company car, and placed them on the polished surface with hands that shook despite my best efforts. "Keep them," I said quietly. "I don't need your name to define me." The walk to the elevator felt like miles. Behind me, I heard Marcus pick up his phone, heard him murmur something to his right-hand man. Mr. Sterling, the enforcer who did all of my father's dirty work. But I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed and I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to fall apart before I pulled myself together and stepped out into the lobby for the last time. That first night of freedom felt more like prison. I went back to my apartment, the penthouse that technically belonged to Thorne Industries, and started packing. I had some money saved in a personal account, enough to get by for a few months while I figured things out. Or so I thought. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. Then another notification. And another. Every single account I had, including the one I had opened years ago, under my mother's maiden name, the one I was certain my father knew nothing about, was frozen solid. My credit cards were declined. My investment accounts were locked. In the span of 2 hours, Marcus Thorne had made sure I had absolutely nothing. That's when I understood. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about a failed presentation or a daughter who talked back. This was about control. This was about making sure. I knew that he owned me, that he could destroy me whenever he wanted, and that freedom was an illusion he could revoke at will. 2 security guards showed up at midnight with an eviction notice. Apparently, the apartment was needed for a new executive, and I had exactly 1 hour to clear out. I grabbed my laptop, a backup hard drive with copies of all my work files, and a suitcase of clothes. Everything else, all the furniture I had bought with my own salary, all the personal items I had collected over years, stayed behind. They wouldn't even let me take my mother's picture from the mantel. The motel in Queens was the kind of place you only ended up when rock bottom had a basement. $50 a night, pay in cash, no questions asked. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered like a dying heartbeat, painting the water-stained ceiling in alternating shades of sickly pink and darkness. I sat on a bed that felt like it had hosted 1,000 desperate stories before mine, staring at my phone and the number that kept getting smaller. $423. That's what I had left to my name after Marcus Thorne, Billionaire Father of the Year, had systematically frozen every account I thought was mine. The springs in the mattress groaned under my weight. Somewhere down the hall, a couple was screaming at each other in Spanish. A siren wailed past on the street below, and I sat there in my $1,000 suit that I'd worn to that disastrous presentation, realizing that I had absolutely no plan. No money, no home, no job, no safety net. Just a father who wanted to watch me crawl back and beg. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, probably a spam call about my car's extended warranty, but something made me open it. The message was only 8 words, but they hit me like a physical blow. "He's watching you. Be careful with Sterling." I read it 3 times, my hands starting to shake. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, Marcus's head of security, a man who looked like he ate glass for breakfast and had the personality to match. A man whose job description definitely went beyond checking employee badges and monitoring security cameras. Who sent this? How did they get my number? And most importantly, how close was Sterling right now? I stood up suddenly, hyper-aware of every sound. The ice machine humming down the hall, footsteps on the floor above me, and then cutting through it all, a sound that turned my blood to ice water. Metal scraping against metal. Someone picking the lock on my door. Training kicked in before thought did. I grabbed my laptop off the nightstand, yanked the backup hard drive from where I'd hidden it under the mattress, and bolted for the bathroom. The window was small, barely big enough for me to squeeze through, and looked out onto a rusted fire escape that probably hadn't been inspected since the Reagan administration. I didn't care. I shoved the window up, threw my laptop and hard drive onto the metal grating, and hauled myself through, just as I heard my room door swing open behind me. I didn't look back. I just ran. Down the fire escape, my heels clanging against metal loud enough to wake the whole building. Hit the alley, kicked off my shoes because you can't run for your life in Jimmy Choo's, and sprinted barefoot down Queens Boulevard. Past the 24-hour laundromat, past the bodega with bars on the windows, past groups of people who barely glanced at the crazy woman running through their neighborhood in business attire and no shoes. In New York, I was barely in the top 10 weirdest things they'd seen that night. 10 blocks later, lungs burning and feet bleeding from the rough pavement, I ducked into an all-night diner. The kind with cracked red vinyl booths and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the disco era and had seen everything. I slid into a booth facing the door, clutching my belongings, like they were the only things keeping me tethered to reality. The waitress didn't even blink at my appearance. And coffee, hun? Please, my voice came out shaky. And can I borrow your phone? Mine's almost dead. She handed me a cordless landline that probably predated cell phones. I dialed the motel, asked for the front desk, and listened as the clerk told me in a bored monotone that someone had broken into room 237 about 20 minutes ago. Trashed the place. Slashed the mattress, emptied the drawers, even checked the toilet tank. Professional job. Nothing stolen because there was nothing to steal. But I knew what they'd been looking for. The hard drive, the evidence, the only leverage I had. Thanks, I managed, hanging up. My hands were shaking so hard the phone nearly slipped from my grip. The waitress returned with coffee so strong it could probably strip paint. You okay, sweetheart? You want me to call the cops? No, the word came out too fast, too sharp. No cops, I'm fine, just a rough night. She nodded, wise enough not to push, and left me alone with my thoughts and my terrible coffee. I sat there for hours as the night bled into early morning, watching every person who walked past the diner's grimy windows, jumping at every sound. My mind raced in circles trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't go back to my apartment that was Thorn Industries' property. I couldn't check into another motel. Marcus had probably flagged my name somehow. I couldn't use my credit cards. Even if they weren't frozen, they'd track me in seconds. I was trapped in my own city, hunted by my own father. That's when the memory surfaced. Unbidden, unwanted, but suddenly the only lifeline I had. Julian Cross. God, I hadn't thought about him in years. Not since I'd ghosted him senior year of college after Marcus had sat me down and explained in that patient voice he used when teaching me hard lessons that people like Julian only stayed friends with people like me because of what they could get from the association. That real friendship was a myth that everyone wanted something, and the sooner I learned to see people as assets or liabilities, the better off I'd be. I'd believed him. Of course I had believed him. He was my father, and I was still young enough to think fathers told you the truth. But now, sitting in that diner at 3 a.m. with my entire life reduced to what I could carry in a laptop bag, I remembered something else about Julian. Something I'd overheard years ago and filed away in the part of my brain where uncomfortable truths went to hide. Julian's father, Richard Cross. He'd been Marcus's business partner once back in the early days, before Thorn Industries became the empire it was. I'd been maybe 8 or 9, creeping down the stairs late at night because I'd heard raised voices. My mother still alive then, but already fading, arguing with Marcus in his study. Richard didn't deserve that, she'd said, her voice sharp with an anger I rarely heard from her. You destroyed him, Marcus. You planted evidence, you lied to the board, you stole his life's work and put your name on it. And now he's bankrupt. His son had to drop out of Princeton. All because you couldn't stand that he was better at something than you. Marcus's response had been calm, almost amused. Business is war, Catherine. And in war, you destroy your enemies before they destroy you. Richard was weak. He would have dragged the company down with his conscience. I did what needed to be done. He killed himself. My mother's voice had broken on those words. Richard killed himself, Marcus. He left a wife and a teenage son because he couldn't live with the shame of what you made everyone believe about him. Then he was weaker than I thought. I had fled back to my room before I could hear any more, pulled the covers over my head, and told myself my father couldn't have done something that terrible. That my mother was upset, exaggerating, not understanding the complexities of business. I had made myself believe that lie for almost 20 years. But now, finally, I let myself see the truth. Marcus had destroyed Julian's father, had driven him to suicide, and Julian had every reason to hate the Thorn name, which meant he was either going to slam the door in my face, or he was going to be the ally I desperately needed. Finding him took 3 minutes of Googling on the diner's Wi-Fi. Julian Cross, attorney at law, specializing in corporate fraud and white-collar crime. Office in Brooklyn, of course. Of course he'd become the exact kind of lawyer who prosecuted men like Marcus Thorn. The universe had a dark sense of humor. I waited until 7 a.m. until I saw lights go on in his office building through the miracle of Google Street View, and then I took 3 buses to Brooklyn because I couldn't risk a taxi or an Uber with credit card records. By the time I arrived, I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who'd spent the night running for her life. The building was modest, nothing like Thorn Tower's aggressive grandeur. Just a regular office building in Park Slope with a coffee shop on the ground floor and the kind of worn brick facade that spoke of honest work rather than ruthless ambition. Julian's office was on the 3rd floor. I stood outside the door marked Julian Cross attorney at law for a full minute, trying to decide if this was the stupidest thing I'd ever done or the only smart thing left. Then I knocked. The man who opened the door was both exactly who I remembered and completely different. Still tall, still had that careful, intelligent way of studying the world, like he was looking for the lies underneath. But the softness I remembered from college, that optimism that had made him believe people were basically good, was gone. The Julian standing in front of me had seen the worst humanity had to offer and had stopped being surprised by it. He looked at me for a long moment, took in my bare feet, my ruined suit, my laptop clutched against my chest like a shield. And then without a word, he stepped aside and let me in. The office was small, but immaculate. Law books lined one-wall case files stacked with military precision on a desk that had probably been bought secondhand, but was polished to a shine. A coffee maker burbled in the corner, filling the space with the smell of something infinitely better than diner coffee. Julian closed the door, locked it, and gestured to a chair. "Sit, you look like you're about to collapse." I sat and then I started talking. I told him everything. The presentation Marcus throwing my portfolio across the boardroom like it was garbage. The humiliation of being dressed down in front of 15 executives who wouldn't meet my eyes. Walking out of Thorn Tower for the last time and thinking I was choosing freedom. The frozen accounts, all of them, including ones I'd hidden. The eviction at midnight. The motel. The anonymous text. The sound of someone picking my lock. Running through Queens in bare feet. The phone call that confirmed someone had torn my room apart looking for something. I showed him the hard drive, the one I'd grabbed on instinct, not even sure what was on it, but knowing it had to be important if I'd risked everything to keep copies of my work. And I showed him the text message. "He's watching you. Be careful with Sterling." When I finished, I was shaking, from adrenaline crash, from fear, from the sheer relief of finally telling someone the truth. Julian had listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his eyes never leaving mine. Now he leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers under his chin, and was quiet for so long I thought he was about to politely show me the door and tell me he couldn't get involved. Instead, he smiled. And it wasn't a happy smile, or a sympathetic smile, or any of the smiles I was expecting. It was the smile of a chess player who'd just seen his opponent make the exact mistake he'd been waiting for. The smile of someone who'd been patient for a very, very long time, and just got handed the opportunity he'd been dreaming of. "Do you know what happened to my father, Evie?" His voice was soft, almost conversational. I swallowed hard. "Yes, I overheard my mother and Marcus once. I'm so sorry, Julian. I should have said something, You were a child." He cut me off, but not unkindly. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. But your father, Marcus Thorne, destroyed my dad. Framed him for embezzlement, stole his patents, made sure no one in the industry would ever hire him again. My father spent 2 years fighting to clear his name, spent every penny we had on lawyers, and when there was nothing left, when he'd lost everything, including his reputation, he drove to a motel in Newark and shot himself. I was 17. My mother found him." Tears stung my eyes. "Julian, I became a lawyer because of your father," he continued. "I specialized in corporate fraud because of your father. I have spent the last decade building a reputation, making connections, learning every single law and loophole and trick that men like Marcus Thorne use to destroy people. And I have been waiting, Evie. Waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough or angry enough to fight back. Waiting for someone from inside that tower to finally say enough." He leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes was almost frightening. "This isn't just your fight, Evie. This is a chance to get justice for everyone he's trampled. My father, your mother, every person whose life Marcus Thorne has destroyed for profit, for ego, for fun. So I'm going to ask you once, and you need to be absolutely sure of your answer. Are you ready for that kind of war? Because once we start this, once we go after a man like Marcus Thorne, there's no going back. He will come at us with everything he has. He will try to destroy us. And if we fail, we'll lose more than money or reputation. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I thought about my mother, dead at 41 from cancer, that the doctor said was aggressive, but that I knew had been fed by years of stress and misery and trying to be enough for a man who saw her as an accessory. I thought about Julian's father driven to suicide by lies. I thought about Eleanor Marcus's assistant, who I'd seen flinch when he raised his voice. I thought about every person I'd watched Marcus casually ruin in conference rooms and hostile takeovers, while I told myself it was just business, just the way the world worked. And I thought about that motel room, the sound of someone picking my lock, the very real knowledge that my own father had sent someone to hurt me. "I'm ready," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "I'm done running, I'm done being afraid, and I'm done letting him win." Julian's smile widened. "Then let's burn his empire to the ground." The transformation was immediate and stunning. Julian moved like a man who'd been preparing for this moment his entire adult life. Within an hour, he'd made a dozen phone calls to lawyers, accountants, former FBI agents turned private investigators. Within a day, he'd set up a shell company called Phoenix Strategy, a web of legal entities so complex that even a forensic accountant would have trouble tracing it back to me. "You're officially a consultant for Phoenix Strategy," he explained, showing me incorporation papers. "You live here now, well, in the apartment above the office that technically I rent, but you're subleasing. All legal, all traceable to the shell company, not to you. Your father can freeze your accounts, but he can't touch what doesn't legally exist yet." He used his own savings to rent a proper office space 3 blocks away, nothing fancy but functional, pulled in favors from every contact he'd made in 10 years of being the kind of lawyer who actually tried to do good. We were building an army quietly, carefully, while Marcus sat in his tower thinking he'd already won. But we had a problem. We needed weapons. We needed proof. We needed evidence of what Marcus really was beyond the carefully crafted public image, beyond the magazine profiles calling him a visionary, beyond the charity galas where he wrote enormous checks and smiled for cameras. "We need someone on the inside," Julian said one night, both of us hunched over laptops and Chinese takeout containers at 2 in the morning. "Someone who's been there long enough to know where the bodies are buried." I thought through everyone who worked at Thorne Industries, trying to imagine who might be brave enough or angry enough to betray Marcus. The list was short. Marcus inspired fear and greed in equal measure, but rarely loyalty and never trust. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. I'd been getting them for days, always blocked, never with messages. But this time there were 3 words. "Library, tomorrow, noon." I showed Julian. He frowned. Could be a trap, or it could be whoever warned me about Sterling. I stared at the message. Either way, I have to go. If there's even a chance someone inside wants to help, then I'm coming with you. The New York Public Library's main branch is the kind of place where you can disappear. Millions of books, thousands of people, enough marble and grandeur that surveillance becomes nearly impossible. We arrived separately, Julian 20 minutes before me, scouting for anyone suspicious. I found her in the 3rd floor reading room, sitting at a table with a book open in front of her that she clearly wasn't reading. Eleanor Hayes, my father's executive assistant for 23 years. A woman I'd seen nearly every day of my adult life and had barely registered as a person. She was just Eleanor, part of the furniture, the woman who brought Marcus his coffee and managed his appointments with invisible efficiency. But now, seeing her away from Thorne Tower, I realized how small she looked, how tired, how much older than her 50-something years. She saw me approaching and visibly steadied herself like someone preparing to jump off a cliff. I slid into the chair across from her. "You sent the messages?" "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. She glanced around nervously, checking faces, looking for watchers. "I don't have much time. He tracks my phone, monitors my emails. I had to buy a burner just to contact you." "Why?" The question came out harsher than I intended. "You've worked for him for over 20 years. You've watched him destroy people. Why help me now?" Eleanor flinched like I'd slapped her. "Because I have a daughter," she said quietly. "She's 26, she's smart and ambitious, and she wants to work in business. And every time I look at her, I see you. I see what your father has done to you over the years, how he's broken you down piece by piece, and I think about my girl and I can't." Her voice cracked. "I can't keep being complicit. I can't keep being part of the machine that destroys young women and calls it business." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small external hard drive, the kind you could buy at any electronics store. Set it on the table between us like it was an explosive device, which in a way it was. "This is everything," Eleanor said. 23 years of documentation. Audio files, emails, bank transfers, scanned contracts, money laundering through offshore accounts, blackmail of 3 sitting senators and a congressman, falsified environmental reports, insider trading, hostile takeovers using illegally obtained information, and the worst part. She looked at me with eyes full of old pain and fresh determination. "He's been forging your signature, Evie, on documents, on contracts, on deals that violate about 15 different laws. He's been building a case against you for years. His insurance policy, if he ever gets caught, he's planning to claim you were running a rogue operation. He has witnesses prepared to testify against you, bank accounts in your name that you never opened, a paper trail that will send you to prison while he walks away clean. The reading room felt too hot suddenly, the air too thick. He's been setting me up for how long? Since you joined the company, maybe longer. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she pushed the drive closer to me. This is everything I could gather without alerting him. There's enough here to end him, Evie. Enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. But if you go public with this, you need to understand what you're starting. Marcus Thorne doesn't lose. He destroys anyone who tries to fight him. And he'll come after you with everything he has. I picked up the drive, felt the weight of it. So small, so unassuming, so incredibly dangerous. Then why give this to me? Why not go to the authorities yourself? Because I'm a coward. Eleanor said it simply, without self-pity. I've been a coward for 23 years, taking his money, doing his bidding, telling myself I was just following orders. I convinced myself I had no choice, that I needed the job, that speaking up would ruin me. But you, she reached across and gripped my hand with surprising strength. You walked away. You chose integrity over comfort. You're braver than I ever was. And if anyone can take him down, it's you. This is my insurance policy, but it's your weapon. Use it. I closed my fingers around the drive. He'll know it was you. When this comes out, he'll figure out where I got it. I know. Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her decades ago, I saw peace in her expression. I've already hired a lawyer, made arrangements. I'm prepared to testify, to go public, to face whatever comes. I'm done being afraid of Marcus Thorne. I'm done enabling him. And honestly, she stood up, gathering her things. It feels like the first free breath I've taken in 20 years. She left before I could respond, disappeared into the stacks, like she'd never been there. I sat at that table for another 30 minutes, holding the hard drive, understanding that what I held was either salvation or damnation, depending on how we used it. Julian was waiting at the coffee shop across the street, his laptop already open, security software running. Well, I set the drive on the table. Eleanor Hayes just gave us everything, but we have a problem. Even with all this evidence, we don't have the resources to fight someone like Marcus. We need money, real money, legal fees, security protection for Eleanor when this goes public. We need to move fast before he realizes what we have. Julian was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping against his coffee cup in a nervous rhythm I remembered from college. There is someone, he said finally. Someone with enough money and enough motivation to want Marcus destroyed. But Evie, this is a deal with the devil, and I mean that literally. Who? Damian Blackwood. The name hit me like cold water. Damian Blackwood. The vulture capitalist. The corporate raider who made Marcus look like a philanthropist. A man whose hostile takeovers were legendary, whose ruthlessness was spoken about in business schools as either a warning or an aspiration depending on who was teaching. Marcus's oldest rival, the one competitor he'd never quite managed to crush. No. The word came out instinctively. Absolutely not. That's like asking a great white shark to protect you from another great white shark. I know, Julian said, but he's the only one with the resources and the motivation. Marcus destroyed Blackwood's mentor 15 years ago, used insider information Damian had shared in confidence. Blackwood's been waiting for an opportunity like this, and he has the kind of money that can protect us while we build the case. I thought about Marcus, about Sterling and his goons, about my room being torn apart, about how we were two people with one hard drive going up against a billionaire with unlimited resources and no conscience. Okay, I said finally. Set up a meeting, but I talked to him alone. If this goes bad, I don't want both of us in his crosshairs. 3 days later, I stood outside Blackwood Capital in Midtown, looking up at a building that rivaled Thorne Tower for sheer intimidation factor, glass and steel, and the promise of cutthroat capitalism. Everything my father had taught me to worship. Everything I was about to use as a weapon against him. The meeting took place in Damian's office in a building that rivaled Thorne Tower for sheer intimidation factor. Damian himself was not what I expected. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed with sharp green eyes that missed nothing. He listened to our pitch without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. You want me to fund your revenge against Marcus Thorne, he said when we finished. It wasn't a question. I want you to fund justice, I corrected. He laughed. Semantics, but interesting semantics. What do I get out of this? A seat on the board of Phoenix Strategy when we succeed, access to our business plans, and the satisfaction of watching your oldest rival be dragged out in handcuffs on national television. Damian considered this for a long moment. Then he walked to his window overlooking Manhattan, and spoke without turning around. Your father destroyed my mentor 20 years ago, used information I trusted him with to ruin a good man's career. I've been waiting for an opportunity like this. But I need to know you're serious. This isn't a game, Evie. If you start this, you have to finish it. There's no going back. I know, I said. I'm already in too deep to go back. He turned and smiled. Then we have a deal, but I want full transparency. Every move you make, every piece of evidence you use, I see it first. I'm not going down if your plan falls apart. I should have seen the red flags. I should have questioned why he agreed so easily. But I was desperate, and desperation makes you blind to danger. We shook hands, and just like that, I was in business with a man almost as dangerous as my father. The first strike came 2 weeks later. Using a carefully sanitized portion of Eleanor's evidence, we leaked information about one of Marcus's recent acquisitions to an investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down corrupt corporations. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Thorne Industries had illegally obtained insider information to undercut a competitor's bid, costing shareholders millions and violating about 15 different SEC regulations. The stock price dropped 12% in one day. I watched it happen from our tiny office in Brooklyn, Julian beside me, both of us glued to the financial news. Marcus's face appeared on CNBC, denying everything, calling it a smear campaign by jealous competitors. But the damage was done. The SEC announced an investigation. Shareholders were demanding answers. The invincible Marcus Thorne was bleeding. I should have been happy. Instead, I felt sick. This was my father, the man who had read me bedtime stories once upon a time before ambition consumed everything human in him. Part of me still hoped he would call, would apologize, would admit what he had done, and try to make it right. He called all right, but not to apologize. "You stupid girl," he snarled when I answered. "Did you really think you could come after me and win? I built you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. You framed me for your crimes." I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "You were going to let me go to prison to save yourself. You're my daughter. You should be willing to make that sacrifice. Family takes care of family." "No, Dad," I said quietly. "Parents take care of children. You just wanted a scapegoat." He hung up. And 2 hours later, the FBI showed up at Julian's office with a warrant for my arrest. Apparently, Marcus had decided to go nuclear. He had turned over all those forged documents to the FBI, claiming I was a rogue employee who had been running money laundering operations without his knowledge. He had witness statements from Sterling and several other executives, all swearing they had seen me conduct illegal deals. He had bank records that seemed to show money flowing into accounts in my name, accounts I had never opened and never knew existed. The case was airtight, too airtight, and I was looking at 20 years in federal prison. Julian immediately went to work on my defense, but we both knew the truth. With Marcus's resources and connections, he could make any evidence disappear and any lie sound like truth. The FBI believed him because he was Marcus Thorne, pillar of the community, generous political donor, respectable businessman. Who was I, a disgruntled daughter with a grudge? They didn't arrest me that day, but only because Julian managed to convince them I wasn't a flight risk. I had to surrender my passport and stay in the city. I was trapped exactly where Marcus wanted me. That night, Julian and I sat in his office surrounded by legal documents and evidence that proved my innocence, but somehow wasn't enough. We were losing. Marcus had played this game for decades. We had been playing for weeks. The math didn't work in our favor. "We need to change the game," I said finally. "Stop playing defense and go on offense. We have Eleanor's evidence, all of it. We use it." Julian looked at me seriously. "If we do that, there's no going back. We're talking about taking down one of the most powerful men in New York. He'll come after us with everything he has." "He's already coming after us with everything he has," I pointed out. "What's he going to do, frame me twice?" But I underestimated how far Marcus would go. 3 days later, Julian was attacked outside his apartment building. 3 men in masks, no identifying features, beat him badly enough to send him to the hospital with a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a warning that if we didn't back off next time, would be worse. I sat beside Julian's hospital bed looking at my friend's bruised face and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This wasn't just about revenge or clearing my name. This was about survival. Marcus had made it clear that he would hurt anyone I cared about, would cross any line, would commit any crime to maintain his power. So I decided to cross some lines myself. Damian Blackwood had been surprisingly quiet during all of this, claiming he needed to keep his distance to avoid suspicion. But when I showed up at his office at midnight demanding to see him, he made time. I told him about Julian, I told him about the FBI investigation, and I told him my plan. You want to destroy him at his own charity gala, Damien said slowly, publicly, in front of every important person in New York. The Thorn Industries annual charity benefit, I confirmed. He's being honored for his philanthropic contributions. 300 guests live streaming press coverage. He'll be on stage accepting an award for being a model citizen, and that's when we show everyone what he really is. It's dangerous, Damien said, but I could see the gleam in his eyes. He liked dangerous. If it goes wrong, you'll look like a vengeful daughter making wild accusations. The press will crucify you. The FBI will use it as more evidence against you. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong, I said. You said you wanted transparency. You said you wanted to see Marcus fall. This is your chance. Are you in or not? He was in. And over the next 3 weeks, we planned every detail of what Julian started calling Operation Phoenix. It was melodramatic, but it fit. I was rising from the ashes of everything Marcus had burned down, and I was going to make sure he burned too. Eleanor provided us with Marcus's complete schedule, security details, and the technical specifications for the gala's audiovisual system. Damien used his connections to plant people in the catering staff, the security team, and the production crew. Julian, despite his injuries and against doctor's orders, coordinated the legal team that would be standing by with everything we needed the moment Marcus incriminated himself. And me, I bought a dress. A red dress that cost more than that motel room in Queens, fitted perfectly to remind everyone that I was Marcus Thorne's daughter, that I belonged in that room just as much as he did. If I was going to burn my father's world down, I was going to look good doing it. The night of the gala arrived faster than I expected. I stood outside the Plaza Hotel, watching New York's elite stream inside in their designer gowns and expensive tuxedos, and felt my courage waver for just a moment. This was insane. I was one person going up against a man with unlimited resources, powerful friends, and absolutely no conscience. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian, who was coordinating everything from a van outside. You've got this. Make him pay. Another text from Eleanor. For all of us, he's hurt. End this. And one from Damien. The world is watching. Show them who you really are. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked inside. The ballroom was everything you would expect from a Marcus Thorne production. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, champagne flowing like water, and a stage with a massive screen displaying a highlight reel of my father's greatest achievements. All fake, all lies, all about to come crashing down. I spotted Marcus immediately holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He looked exactly like what he was, a king in his castle, untouchable and supreme. He hadn't seen me yet, but Mr. Sterling had. I watched his eyes widen, watched him reach for his phone, probably to call security, but before he could, 2 of Damien's people intercepted him smoothly, guiding him away with some excuse about an urgent phone call. Sterling wouldn't be a problem tonight. We had made sure of that. I walked directly toward my father, and the crowd parted like I was carrying a plague. Everyone knew there was bad blood between Marcus Thorne and his daughter. Everyone loved gossip more than they loved good taste. The whispers followed me like a wave. Marcus saw me when I was 10 feet away. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, anger, and finally amusement. He actually smiled. Evelyn, he said loudly enough for everyone around us to hear. What a surprise. I didn't think you'd have the courage to show your face here given your current legal troubles. I wouldn't miss this for the world, Dad, I said sweetly. I've been looking forward to your big night for weeks. He studied me carefully, trying to figure out my game. But before he could say anything else, the lights dimmed. It was time for the presentation, time for Marcus to take the stage and accept his award for being a pillar of the community. I took a seat at a table near the front, ignoring the curious stares and whispered speculation. On stage, the Master of Ceremonies was beginning his introduction, listing all of Marcus's achievements, his charitable donations, his business success. It was nauseating. Marcus walked on stage to thunderous applause. He looked every inch the benevolent billionaire, waving graciously, his smile perfect and practiced. The screen behind him began showing clips from his career, carefully curated moments of triumph. He started his acceptance speech with the usual platitudes, thanking his team, dedicating the award to his late wife, talking about his commitment to making the world better. And then he saw me stand up. My daughter is here tonight, he said, and I could hear the edge in his voice, even as he maintained his smile. Evelyn has always been passionate, perhaps too passionate at times. A perfect example of how youthful enthusiasm can sometimes lead people astray from practical reality. The crowd laughed politely. This was my cue. I raised my hand and Julian, watching from the van outside, pressed a button. The screen behind Marcus flickered. The carefully crafted tribute video froze, glitched, and then changed entirely. Suddenly, everyone in the room was seeing bank transfer records, wiretapped phone conversations, emails arranging illegal deals, video footage of secret meetings. Marcus's face on that screen, caught in grainy security camera footage, handing envelopes of cash to a state senator who had mysteriously changed his vote on environmental regulations that would have cost Thorne Industries millions. Audio of Marcus arranging to destroy a competitor using fabricated sexual harassment claims. Documents showing shell companies and offshore accounts designed to hide taxable income. And worst of all, the forged signatures. Side-by-side comparisons of my real signature, and the dozens of times Marcus had faked it on illegal documents. Expert analysis showing the forgeries. Testimony from a handwriting specialist we had lined up explaining exactly how he had done it. The room went completely silent. 300 of New York's most powerful people sat frozen, watching Marcus Thorne's empire revealed as the house of cards it had always been. The live stream was broadcasting this to thousands of people watching online. There was no taking it back. Marcus stood on that stage, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Shock, rage, fear, and finally calculation. He was already trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain it away. But I wasn't done. I walked up to the stage, took the microphone from the stunned master of ceremonies, and looked out at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "this is the real Marcus Thorne, a man who built his empire on lies, betrayal, and the destruction of anyone who got in his way. A man who blackmailed politicians, destroyed competitors with false accusations, and committed fraud on a scale that would make Enron jealous. And when he thought he might get caught, he framed his own daughter to save himself." Behind me, the screen continued its damning display. Eleanor had given us everything, and we were showing it all. Every crime, every victim, every dirty secret Marcus thought was safely buried. For years, I believed him when he said success required sacrifice. I continued. I believed him when he said family was everything. I believed him when he said he loved me. But love doesn't blackmail. Love doesn't frame. Love doesn't destroy. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. A dozen FBI agents walked in, led by Agent Morrison, the same agent who had questioned me weeks ago. Behind them came state prosecutors, SEC investigators, and enough law enforcement to arrest half the room. But they were only there for one person. Agent Morrison walked up to the stage, and Marcus Thorne, for the first time in his life, looked small, looked afraid, looked exactly like what he was. A criminal caught in the act with nowhere left to run. "Marcus Thorne," Agent Morrison said clearly, "you're under arrest for money laundering, fraud, blackmail, forgery, and about 30 other charges we're still counting. You have the right to remain silent." The click of handcuffs echoed through the silent ballroom. Cameras flashed as photographers captured every angle of Marcus Thorne's fall from grace. The man who had terrified me my entire life was led away in handcuffs, and I felt absolutely nothing. No triumph, no sadness, just emptiness where fear and love and desperate hope used to live. The gala dissolved into chaos. Guests scrambling to distance themselves from Marcus, reporters shouting questions, law enforcement rounding up Sterling, and several executives who had been complicit in Marcus's schemes. I stood on that stage and watched it all happen like I was viewing it through glass. Julian appeared beside me, still moving carefully because of his injuries, but grinning like he had won the lottery. "We did it," he said simply. Eleanor emerged from the crowd, tears streaming down her face, and hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for having the courage I never did." And Damian Blackwood, true to form, was already working the room, positioning himself to pick up the pieces of Thorne Industries' collapse. He caught my eye across the ballroom and raised his champagne glass in a small salute. We had both gotten what we wanted. The legal aftermath took months. Marcus fought every charge with armies of lawyers, but Eleanor's evidence was too solid, too comprehensive, too damning. The FBI found more crimes as they dug deeper, things even Eleanor hadn't known about. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. He would die behind bars. The charges against me were dropped immediately. The forged signatures were proven false, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. My reputation, such as it was, survived intact. Thorne Industries collapsed spectacularly. Shareholders fled, assets were seized, and within 6 months, the company that had defined Manhattan's skyline for decades was gone. The building still stands, but it houses different companies now. The Thorn name is just a cautionary tale business schools use to teach ethics. Phoenix Strategy, on the other hand, thrived. With Damien's investment and my newfound notoriety as the woman who took down Marcus Thorn, we attracted clients who wanted to do business ethically, who wanted to prove that success and morality weren't mutually exclusive. We specialized in renewable energy, ethical investing, and helping other people escape toxic business relationships. I used a portion of the assets recovered from Marcus's criminal enterprises to establish the Eleanor Hayes Foundation, dedicated to helping whistleblowers and protecting people who speak truth to power. Eleanor herself served on the board until she retired, finally free from Marcus's shadow. Julian recovered fully from his attack and became my business partner. We never talked about what might have been between us. What we had was better than romance. We had trust forged in the fire of fighting a common enemy. And me, I changed my name legally, not back to my mother's maiden name, but to Reed, her middle name, the name she would have used if she had ever found the courage to leave Marcus. I'm Evelyn Reed now. The Thorn name died with Marcus's conviction, and I'm happy to let it stay dead. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I stood on the balcony of Phoenix Strategy's offices looking out over Manhattan. Julian and Eleanor joined me, the three of us silent for a moment, just taking in the city that had almost destroyed us. He once told me I was nothing without the Thorn name, I said quietly. Julian smiled. And what are you now? I thought about everything we had built. The foundation, the company, the lives we had helped change. I thought about the people who reached out to me with their own stories of toxic relationships, abusive bosses, and families that destroyed rather than supported. I thought about every person who told me my story gave them courage to leave their own toxic situations. I'm Evelyn Reed, I said, and I'm just getting started. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. Toxic people don't deserve your loyalty just because you share DNA. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up for you when the world is burning down. And you are never, ever powerless, no matter how powerless they make you feel. My father spent decades making me believe I was nothing without him. It took losing everything to realize that I was nothing with him. And once I understood that, once I stopped seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it, I became unstoppable. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family? What was your breaking point? What would you do differently? Drop your story in the comments, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories coming, more proof that you can survive, that you can fight back, and that you can win. The phoenix always rises from the ashes. You just have to be willing to burn first. But my story doesn't end there, because cutting ties and winning in court isn't the same as healing. And in the months after Marcus's sentencing, I learned that revenge and justice might feel satisfying in the moment, but they don't fill the hole that toxic relationships leave behind. The nightmare started about a month after the trial ended. I would wake up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, convinced that Marcus had escaped prison and was coming for me. Or worse, I would dream that none of it had happened, that I was still that desperate daughter in his office begging for scraps of approval that would never come. Julian found me on the office couch more than once, staring at nothing, unable to explain why I couldn't go home to my new apartment. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, told me this was normal, that trauma doesn't disappear just because the person who caused it is locked away, that I had spent 28 years being conditioned to believe my worth was determined by Marcus's approval, and that kind of programming doesn't delete itself overnight. You won the war, Evelyn, she said during one of our sessions, but you're still fighting battles in your head. And those battles are against yourself, against the voice that still sounds like your father telling you that you're not enough. She was right. Even as Phoenix Strategy grew, even as the Eleanor Hayes Foundation helped hundreds of people escape their own toxic situations, I found myself second-guessing every decision. Was I being too soft? Was I being too harsh? Would Marcus have done this differently? And then I would catch myself horrified that I was still using him as my measuring stick for success. The first time I had to fire someone at Phoenix Strategy nearly broke me. The employee had been consistently underperforming, missing deadlines, and creating a hostile environment for other team members. It was a clear case of someone who needed to go. But when I called him into my office to have that conversation, I saw Marcus's face superimposed over my own. I heard his voice in my words. and I spent the rest of the day locked in the bathroom crying and hating myself for becoming exactly what I had fought against. Julian found me there, of course. He had a talent for knowing when I was spiraling. "You're not him," he said, simply sliding down the wall to sit beside me on the cold tile floor. "You gave that employee 3 warnings, offered training, tried to accommodate his personal issues. Marcus would have destroyed him on day 1 just to prove he could. There's a difference between being firm and being cruel, Evie. You need to learn where that line is." "But what if I can't see the line anymore?" I asked, my voice small and broken. "What if he damaged me so much that I can't tell the difference?" Julian took my hand. "Then you keep people around you who can see the line. That's what Eleanor and I are here for. To remind you who you really are when you forget." That conversation changed something fundamental in how I approached leadership. I stopped trying to be the opposite of Marcus and started trying to be myself. I made mistakes. I was too lenient sometimes and too strict others. But I was learning, growing, becoming someone I could recognize in the mirror. The real turning point came about 8 months after Marcus's conviction. I received a letter from him smuggled out through his lawyer despite the restraining order I had filed. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was vintage Marcus Thorne. No apology, no acknowledgement of his crimes, just page after page of justifications and accusations. He blamed me for destroying the family legacy. He insisted that everything he had done was for my benefit, to make me strong, to prepare me for a cruel world. He claimed that I would eventually understand, that one day I would run a company and realize that hard decisions require hard hearts. And he ended with a prediction that haunted me for weeks. "You'll become me eventually, Evelyn. Because you're my daughter, and that means you carry the same ambition, the same ruthlessness, the same understanding that sentiment is weakness. The only difference is, I had the courage to embrace it. You're still pretending you can build an empire on kindness. When that illusion shatters, you'll understand that I was right all along. See you on the other side." I read that letter 5 times, each time feeling my stomach twist tighter. Because part of me, the part that still craved his approval, despite everything, wondered if he was right. Was I fooling myself? Was Phoenix Strategies' early success just beginner's luck that would crumble under real pressure? Would I eventually have to choose between my ethics and my survival? Dr. Chen's response to that letter was immediate and firm. "He's still trying to control you, Evelyn. He's in prison, powerless, and the only weapon he has left is your own self-doubt. Don't give him that power." But it wasn't that simple. The letter triggered something in me, a need to prove once and for all that I wasn't Marcus Thorne's daughter in any way that mattered. I threw myself into work with an intensity that worried everyone around me. I took on every client, pursued every opportunity, worked 18-hour days, trying to build something so successful that no one, including myself, could question whether I had what it took. Eleanor was the one who finally called me out. She walked into my office at midnight on a Tuesday, found me surrounded by spreadsheets and empty coffee cups, and simply unplugged my laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked, and it wasn't really a question. "Building a company," I said defensively. "Making sure we succeed, proving that ethical business can work." "Proving to who?" Eleanor's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Because from where I'm standing, you're working yourself to death to prove something to a man in prison who will never ever give you what you want. You already proved yourself, Evie. The foundation is thriving. The company is profitable. You've helped more people in 8 months than Marcus helped in his entire life. When is it going to be enough?" I opened my mouth to argue and found I had no words. Because she was right. I was still performing for an audience of one, still dancing to music only. I could hear, still trying to earn love from someone constitutionally incapable of giving it. "I don't know how to stop," I admitted finally. "I don't know who I am if I'm not fighting him or proving him wrong. That's all I've been doing for so long that I don't remember what it felt like before." Eleanor sat down across from me, her expression sad but understanding. "Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Not Marcus's daughter, not the woman who destroyed Marcus Thorne, just Evelyn. Who is she? What does she want? What makes her happy?" Those questions should have been easy to answer. They weren't. I realized I had never really asked them before. Every decision I had ever made had been filtered through the lens of what Marcus wanted, or what would spite Marcus. I had never stopped to consider what I wanted independent of him. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a vacation. Not a working vacation, not a networking conference, but an actual vacation. 2 weeks in a cabin in Vermont with no cell service, no internet, just me and books, and silence, and time to think. The first 3 days were torture. I kept reaching for my phone, kept thinking about work, kept making mental lists of things that needed my attention. But gradually, as the forced disconnection continued, something shifted. I started sleeping through the night. I started noticing things like the way morning light hit the lake, the sound of birds, the taste of food when you actually paid attention to it. Small things, insignificant things. Things Marcus would have called a waste of time. And slowly, carefully, I started to remember who I had been before Marcus's voice became the dominant narrative in my head. I remembered a girl who loved reading, who spent hours drawing elaborate cityscapes, who wanted to be an architect before Marcus convinced her that only business mattered. I remembered someone who laughed easily, who trusted people who believed the world was generally good. I couldn't get that girl back. Too much had happened, too many scars ran too deep. But I could honor her. I could build a life that incorporated the things she loved with the strength I had gained through surviving Marcus. When I returned to New York, I made some changes. I cut my work hours to something reasonable. I hired a proper management team, so I wasn't trying to control every aspect of Phoenix strategy. I started taking art classes on weekends. Small things, but they felt revolutionary. And I finally did something I had been avoiding since the trial ended. I visited my mother's grave. I hadn't been there since her funeral, 16 years ago. Marcus had never gone, had never pretended to mourn the wife he had slowly destroyed with his contempt and indifference. And I had been too consumed with seeking his approval to honor her memory the way she deserved. The cemetery was quiet on that October afternoon, leaves falling around me in shades of gold and red. I found her headstone simple and understated, nothing like the ostentatious monument Marcus had already commissioned for himself at a different cemetery. I sat down on the grass beside her and finally said all the things I should have said years ago. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you," I started, my voice breaking. "I was just a kid, but I saw how he treated you and I never said anything. I thought if I was good enough, successful enough, maybe he would be kinder to you too. But it wasn't about us, was it? It was always about him and his need to feel superior by making everyone around him feel small." I told her everything. The trial, the evidence, Marcus's conviction, Phoenix strategy and the foundation, the nightmares and the therapy, and the slow, painful work of unlearning 28 years of toxic programming. "He's in prison now," I said finally. And I thought that would feel like closure, like winning, but mostly I just feel tired of hating him, tired of letting him take up space in my head. "I want to let it go, Mom. I want to move on, but I don't know how." The wind rustled through the trees, and I could almost hear her voice, gentle and kind the way I remembered it from childhood before the cancer and the chemo and the slow fade into nothing. "You already know how, sweetheart. You just have to choose it every day." I don't know if I actually heard that, or if it was just my imagination supplying what I needed to hear. But either way, it helped. I sat there until the sun started to set, talking to my mother, crying for the relationship we never got to have, and slowly, finally beginning to forgive myself for all the ways I thought I had failed her. Forgiveness became a theme in my therapy sessions after that. Not forgiving Marcus, Dr. Chen was clear that I didn't owe him that. But forgiving myself. Forgiving the girl who had been so desperate for her father's love that she ignored every red flag. Forgiving the young woman who had wasted years trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. Forgiving the person I had been for not knowing what I know now. "You did the best you could with the information and resources you had at the time," Dr. Chen reminded me constantly. "You can't judge past Evelyn by present Evelyn's standards. That's not fair to either of you. It was hard work. Maybe harder than taking down Marcus had been. Because dismantling an external enemy is straightforward compared to dismantling the enemy that lives in your own thoughts. But gradually, session by session, day by day, I started to feel lighter, started to recognize that voice in my head that sounded like Marcus, and learned to counter it with my own voice, my own truth. Phoenix Strategy's 1-year anniversary came with unexpected fanfare. We had grown to 30 employees, had completed successful campaigns for a dozen major clients, and had been featured in Fast Company as one of the most innovative startups in New York. The Eleanor Hayes Foundation had helped 43 whistleblowers find legal protection and employment after escaping toxic work environments. By any objective measure, we were succeeding beyond what I had imagined possible. We threw a party at our offices, nothing ostentatious, just good food and good people celebrating something real we had built together. Julian gave a speech about second chances and chosen family. Eleanor teared up talking about how proud she was of everyone in the room, and when it was my turn to speak, I found myself looking at these people who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Contentment, not happiness exactly, not yet, but a quiet satisfaction that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, surrounded by people who saw me for who I really was and chose to stay anyway. A year ago, I said, my voice steady and clear, I was sleeping in a motel in Queens with nothing but a laptop and a dream of revenge. I wanted to destroy Marcus Thorne, and I did. But what I didn't realize then was that destroying him wasn't going to be enough. Because the real work wasn't taking him down. It was building something better in his place. It was proving that you can be successful without being cruel, powerful without being destructive, and that the most important victory isn't over your enemies, but over the voice inside that tells you you're not enough. I paused, looking around the room at faces I had come to know and trust. We're not just a company, we're proof that there's another way. And every day we show up and choose ethics over expedience, compassion over cruelty. We're winning a battle that matters more than any courtroom victory. So thank you for believing in this, for believing in me, for being the family I chose instead of the one I was stuck with. The applause was genuine and warm, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt truly proud of what I had accomplished. Not because it would hurt Marcus or prove him wrong, but because it was good work that helped people and made the world slightly less terrible. After the party, after everyone had gone home and Julian was locking up the office, I found myself alone on that same balcony where I had stood 6 months ago, declaring I was just getting started. The city stretched out before me, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them probably struggling with their own versions of Marcus Thorne, their own toxic relationships, their own desperate searches for approval, their own journeys from victim to survivor to something beyond either label. My phone rang. Unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Evelyn Reed. The voice was young, nervous female. I'm sorry to call so late. I got your number from the foundation website. I watched your interview last month, the one where you talked about escaping toxic family dynamics. And I need help. My father, he's a lot like yours was. And I don't know how to leave. I don't know if I can. I closed my eyes, remembering that terrified girl in the motel room, the one who thought she had lost everything and didn't realize she was about to gain herself. Tell me your story, I said gently, and then let's figure out what happens next, together. As I listened to this stranger pour out her pain, I understood something fundamental. Marcus's letter had been wrong about almost everything, but he had been right about one thing. I did carry something from him, an inheritance I couldn't escape. But it wasn't ruthlessness or ambition or the belief that sentiment equals weakness. What I inherited from Marcus Thorne was an intimate understanding of what it feels like to be manipulated, controlled, and made to feel worthless by someone who should have loved you. And instead of using that knowledge to hurt others the way he did, I was using it to help them escape. That was my legacy. Not the empire he built and lost, but the foundation I created from its ruins. Not the Thorne name that once opened doors through fear, but the Reed name that opened them through trust. I talked to that young woman for over an hour, connecting her with resources, sharing my own story, reminding her that she was stronger than she knew and that leaving was possible, even when it felt impossible. When we finally hung up, she was crying, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. And I stood on that balcony looking out at New York and realized that I had finally answered Eleanor's question from months ago. Who was Evelyn when she wasn't defined by Marcus Thorne? She was someone who turned her worst experience into someone else's hope. She was someone who learned that the opposite of cruelty wasn't weakness, but strength tempered with compassion. She was someone still learning, still growing, still making mistakes, but making them authentically as herself, rather than as a reaction to someone else. The phoenix doesn't rise from the ashes unchanged. The fire transforms its scars, it makes it something new. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the goal isn't to erase what Marcus did to me, but to metabolize it, to transmute pain into purpose and trauma into wisdom. I'm not healed. I probably never will be completely. There are still days when I hear his voice in my head, still moments when I doubt myself, Still nightmares where I'm back in that conference room being told I'm nothing without his name. But those days are farther apart now. And when they come, I have tools to handle them. I have Julian reminding me who I really am. I have Eleanor modeling what courage looks like. I have Dr. Chen helping me untangle the knots Marcus tied in my psyche. And I have myself finally learning to be my own advocate instead of my own worst critic. This is what I want you to understand if you're in the middle of your own battle with a toxic relationship. Leaving is just the beginning. Winning, if you're lucky enough to win, is just the beginning. The real work comes after, in the quiet moments when you have to decide who you're going to be now that you're free. And that work is hard and messy and nonlinear and absolutely worth it. You're going to have good days and bad days. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to wonder if you made the right choice. You're going to hear their voice in your head telling you that you're not good enough, strong enough, smart enough. And you're going to have to choose every single day to believe your voice instead of theirs. But here's the thing they never tell you, the thing I wish someone had told me in that motel room in Queens when I thought my life was over. Freedom is terrifying at first because you've been in a cage so long you forgot what it felt like to fly. But once you remember, once you stretch those wings and realize the sky belongs to you, there's no going back. Marcus took 28 years of my life, but he doesn't get the rest. He doesn't get to define my future the way he defined my past. And neither does your toxic person get to keep you trapped forever, whether they're physically present or just living rent-free in your thoughts. So if you're reading this, if you're stuck in your own version of my story, here's what I want you to know. You can leave. You can fight back. You can win. And when you do, when you're standing in the rubble of everything they told you that you were and everything they said you would never be, you get to build something new, something yours, something they can never touch. And that, more than any revenge, more than any public downfall, more than any prison sentence, is the sweetest victory of all. Now tell me your story. What's holding you back from leaving your toxic situation? What would freedom look like for you, and what's one small step you could take today toward that freedom? Share in the comments, because your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to see to start their own. And if you've made it this far in my story, if something here resonated with the battle you're fighting, smash that like button and subscribe. Because I'm still learning, still growing, still figuring out how to be Evelyn Reed instead of Marcus Thorne's daughter. And maybe together we can all learn how to rise from our own ashes.